Positional chess. Some people hate it, some people love it. Odds are if you hate it, you're probably bad at it, so you should focus on it. That was me. So we're going to be looking at a game by a great positional chess author. He has many, many books. This is a game from his positional playbook, Jacob Aagard, a strong Grandmaster, versus Hussein, another strong Grandmaster. This was played in 2008 in an Olympiad, and let's get into it. After the game, we're going to be looking at a strictly positional puzzle. That is beautiful, and, we'll get there. So, in this game, Aagard begins with e4, and as usual, we see a Sicilian. We get knight f3, the open Sicilian, knight c6, all very standard. The exchange in the center after d4, knight f6, knight c3, and now pawn e5, resembling a Sveshnikov. The Sveshnikov was semi-popular, but I think it really gained traction and a ton of popularity during Fabiano versus Magnus, their world championship match. I think Magnus went like 14 years without ever losing a chess game playing this e5 Sicilian stuff, which is wild. Okay, so typically the knight comes to b5. You don't want to bring it to f3. You don't want to bring it to f5, where you can potentially get doubled pawns. You want to bring it to b5 and threaten d6. So black has to go pawn to d6 to disallow the knight from coming there. And here we get knight to d5. Now, what to notice about this, and the beautiful thing about e5 is on every level, it's a bad positional move, yet it's still a great move. Why is it bad positionally? Well, it gives up d5 control, and you give yourself a backwards pawn. But like in all e5 openings, black is going to try to press for d5, and the second he plays d5, his position comes to life. So knight d5 is a line that forever stops that. We get knight takes, and what should you take back with? Well, not the queen, right? Because if you take back with the queen, they have bishop to e6. It's a dynamic position. Their pawn will march up the board sooner rather than later. So we get pawn takes, statically holding this bad pawn structure together, as well as gaining a tempo here on the knight. We are standing up, by the way, today for reasons. Knight to b8, the knight drops back to its starting square, and okay, pawn to a4. Now, what pawn to a4 does is, well, yes, it guards the knight. Maybe it slows down b5 if that's what black was going for. But it also makes the knight better placed on a3 if it ever is to get kicked out, because now the rook sees it. Bishop to e7. Both sides just begin developing their pieces. There's many squares you could. They choose these. Okay, a6, where does the knight go? Well, it drops back to a3, right? The c file, maybe you want to push a pawn there. Maybe you want to push a knight there. Let us see. And here black makes the mistake of going bishop to g5. Not clear why it's a mistake, but what should black play here? Black should play pawn to f5. Point is, these pawns next to each other in the center of the board control a lot of squares in white's territory. Sometimes you're going to go that way, sometimes you're going to go this way, probably f4, but you gain space. Then you can bring the knight in, maybe you can rook lift if you handle these bishops correctly. So f5 is still theory. I don't know why he went bishop to g5, but this trade helps white. Why does it help white? Well, remember that weak pawn on d6? It's on a dark square. You just traded dark squared bishops. How does white take advantage of the dark squared hole? Or dark squared focal point, rather. Knight to c4. See, this forces the queen to now drop back to have to guard the pawn. And all of a sudden, black is just tied down. You see this hole on b6? How do you gain control of the hole on b6? You go a5. This is known as a deep freeze in endgames. And what it is, the way I like to view it, is basically one pawn controls two pawns. Right? And there's no b5 because of en passant. And it's even better when the knight can jump over to b6. His knight guards b6, but then his bishop is bad because his knight has to guard b6. Okay, we got rook to b8, maybe trying to expand on the b file, but now b4. Stopping the knight from coming to c5, gaining space on the queen side. Life is good. We get knight to f6, but now the knight jumps to b6. Black's like, hold on. Let me go back. Okay, so what to do here? You could take the bishop, though I would argue this knight is better than that bishop. You could take the knight, but then you have no advantage. What else could you do? You don't want to go back and repeat the position. So he goes pawn to c4. This is a great move. He's gaining even more space on the queen side, rather. Now after pawn takes, yes, these are doubled pawns, but he's going to challenge the integrity of this pawn structure soon to come with the move c5. So we get bishop to d7 developing. We get queen to d2 connecting the rooks. And now we get pawn to f5. But this is too little too late. White already has a great advantage here. positionally, right? Abstract material is the same. Rook to c1. You could tell he wants to play c5. Black goes rook to c8, stopping c5. But does it stop c5? It does not. Pawn to c5, the best move. See, here we would get pawn takes, pawn takes. It looks like you lose a pawn, but how does white win here? White goes pawn to d6. And you see, if you brought this rook over, he would have check, but you brought the other rook over, so he can't take. There's no check, so you would win the queen. And if the queen moves anywhere, you just pick up the rook. So you win a rook, so black can't take. So he goes king h8. We go rook d1, right? If this opens up, you're going to have the d file. So he goes bishop a4, and it looks like black gains a tempo on the rook. But if you remember, the rook was on f1, and now it is on e1. I think it's hard to argue that the rook was better on f1. It is definitely better on e1. And I would say this bishop is worse on a4 because it kind of hits air. So black's bishop got worse. White's rook got better. Positional advantage goes to white. Queen to f8, getting out of the way of the rook. And queen to a2, gaining a tempo on the bishop. He goes bishop to b4, but again, this is a favorable pawn trade. Don't ask me what this pawn structure is called. I would be sad if that had a name. This is very strange, right? Pawn, 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 alternating. But queen a7, right? Don't go queen a5. I think queen a5 looks the most natural, but all of a sudden, they just win a pawn, and you have no advantage. So queen to a7. You're going to be trying to get c6 in, right? You guard b6. This rook is now tied down to b7. We get rook to e8, but that does not stop pawn to c6, right? You're just crashing through. We get rook to a8. You could get fancy and go for something like this, but there's no need to get fancy. Just queen takes b7. You pick up a pawn. You have 2 pawns on the 6. They say that is equal to a queen. Don't go queen d7 and lose the b pawn. Go queen c7, guarding it. And here black resigned. Black resigned because these pawns at the end of the day are a queen. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. But these pawns are a queen. They're going to roll forward. No one's going to stop them. And white will win one way or another. So he just chooses to resign. But now, positional puzzle. So I'll give you guys a second to digest this position. And then we'll talk about it. This one's wild. Okay, so white to move. The position is locked. I would say it's hard to improve these bishops. Which pieces thrive in locked positions? Knights. So which pieces should you try to improve in locked positions the most? I would say knights. Now, which knight is worse? The knight on c3 or the knight on f3? I would say the knight on c3 is worse because at least the white knight on f3 can go to g5, try to break through with e6. But if you go knight g5, they're just going to go e6. This knight has no good squares, but it does have good routes. So if you could put a knight anywhere on the board, where would you put it? c5 is an outpost. Could you find a route for this knight to c5? Look at this. Boom, 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 boom. It is a locked position, so you could maneuver and lose tempo, time, in locked positions, because no one's going to be blowing open the center. So the move, oh yeah, I wanted to show pawn to h3 is no good because deep freeze. And you can't go g4 anymore because then you have an outside isolated pawn that is not really a passed pawn because we have a pawn on g6. So the move is knight to b1. And here black played pawn to e6. However, I was wondering what to do if black plays knight c4. Right, you don't want to go b3 kicking it out because not only do you create holes, you stop your knight from routing over to c5. So against knight c4, you just go knight d2. You would get an exchange and no one's stopping your knight from coming to c5. Granted, you don't get a knight on g5, but in life, like chess, you can't have everything. So he goes pawn to e6. Where do we go? Well, we go knight to d2. He doesn't stop us. Now, here black plays pawn c5, and I believe the reason he did this is because when you feel like you're on the brink of collapse, you should dynamically try to change the pawn structure as much as possible, because typically attacks are geared through pawn structure, and if you're able to change the pawn structure, provide shock value, your opponent needs to switch gears, and we know there's a lot of tunnel vision involved in chess. But that is a free pawn, knight to a4. He goes knight b3. Black goes bishop to h6, attacking the pawn. We go pawn g3. Black goes bishop f8. The c5 pawn you don't care about losing, and it's not really attacked. So in this position, he plays a beautiful move, that is pawn to h3. You see, now they can't go here stopping g4, because if h4, you would just push. This was the end of the puzzle, but one continuation could be maybe black builds up on c8. You go g4. They take, you take. And yeah, not so easy for black to play. If takes, the knight moves. You can either go rook to h8, pinning the bishop to the king. But I think rook to h7 is just very easy because you go knight g5. They lose the f7 pawn, and then they easily lose the game. How else could black deal with g4? Well, he could go here, but then you could just bust open the center of the board, right? This is a common, overwhelming way of playing for whites, or in chess, where they can't stop e6, knight g5. You might need to worry about some pins, but black's king can't go kingside, can't go queenside, and it will get bullied in the center of the board. So, knight to b1, a crazy move. But if you ask yourself the right questions, then you can come to a ridiculous looking move like this. So today was a positional video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you as always for watching, and have a great day. Boom.